Hello and welcome to episode 22 of No Time to Cry. You will notice that Laura isn't with me this week. It's because she's still on holiday, but I have got a special guest with us. I'm going to let him introduce himself, but his name's Wes and he'll be with us this week to tell us a little bit about his story, his experience of grief, and that kind of goes to a multitude of different areas in his life, whether that be the loss of someone close to him, his experiences of how he's grown up, changing the way that he's lived his life, and also then talking into the support that he currently does for children in his community and things like that. So, hi, Wes, you okay?
Hi, Shannon. Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to come on board. This is a completely different type of podcast I've been on before, so I'm really looking forward to this.
No, it'll be good. And I think it's really good for our listeners to hear. Do you know what, actually, from a man as well? Because I think that, you know, Laura and I and Paula, who's been one of our guests who helps us out on the podcast, I do think that men and women deal with grief slightly differently. I think we deal with our emotions slightly differently.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really important to hear it from a male perspective, how you've dealt with certain things in your life and whether that actually is the same. And maybe we're a lot closer to how we deal with things than what we think. Maybe women just vocalize it slightly differently to men and vice versa. So no, I think it's a great opportunity to have you on. And when you reached out to us, I was like, absolutely, get on the podcast. Your story sounds one that's bloody hell been a difficult kind of up and down journey. And I think it's important for people to hear about that, because it's not often that you hear sort of voices like yourselves on different platforms, and if we can support with that, then we'd love to. So do you want to give us like a little bit of a intro about yourself, and then I'll ask some questions to you?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Wesley Cunliffe. I'm a youth worker. I work across the UK. I go into educational settings and I mentor young people that are going through a difficult time in their lives, whatever point that may be. I work with young people for serious youth violence, work with young people involved in drug dealing. I work with young people involved in antisocial behaviour. And I also work with a charity, a domestic violence charity as well now, like you said, with men in particularly. I also work with survivors, male survivors of domestic violence as well. So which is pretty cool to do as well. So yeah, I do that, and I just advocate for these people really on their behalf.
No, that's incredible. And what got you into that line of work?
Well, in terms of working with young people, it wasn't something I was looking to do, really, supporting people. It came completely by surprise to me. When I got into trouble when I was 17, after I finished my custodial or my remand time in care, I got given a YRO, which is a youth rehabilitation order, which is like which is what a license for young offenders, you know. And because I committed a serious crime, but it was my first one, the judge gave me a long time on the license. So I was 20 when it's finally coming off, and my youth offending officer, my probation officer, within youth offending or youth justice they call it now, was talking to me, and he said there's a position going for a volunteer within Newport youth offending or youth justice now. And I was like, right. And I was looking at him funny. I was like, where are you going with this? And he was he says, working with young people, you know, going down the same path as you. And I was like, absolutely not doing that, no way, I'm not dealing with kids. And he said to me, well, Wes, you'd be pretty good at that, because remember when you were 16? I went, yeah, exactly. That's fine. Yeah, I'm not doing it. And I went to the local leisure centre. I got given a job there as a volunteer. Then I got taken on as a casual, you know, like a 0-hour contract, they call it now, isn't it? But at the when I was doing it, it was like a casual. But I was getting work there regularly. And there was a local guy there, Tommy Carroll, Irish man, lovely man, give me the opportunity to work there. And the local Millennium Centre, down a pool, but we had, like, you know, sports courts and things like that. And obviously I'm from that area, and I know a lot of young people were going through a difficult time, and a lot of young people making negative choices. So they had me in there, sports coaching, with these young people, five-a-side, basketball. They used to come in for some education. I used to encourage them to get involved with the education, and things like that. And I really enjoyed it. I didn't think I did, but I did. I really, really enjoyed it. And I never looked back from that, really. I just kept going and going and going, and then ended up working for Newport City Council in residential care with young people. I've been in that path myself, so I know what that's like. And also, I've worked with young people in a pupil referral unit, so young people who've been excluded, from school, mainstream school.
Yeah.
Uh, and a gentleman come across me then and said, "Do you want to work with young people actually being affected by drug dealing and knife crime?" And I was like, "Yeah, why not?" And that was it. I just kept moving like that, really, moving that direction. And then people get wind of the story, really. And I think the reason people got wind of the story was the rugby side of it, especially in Wales.
Yeah.
Rugby's in the DNA. So I think it gained real momentum really for that. And yeah, end up on the news, online, BBC. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
No, that's incredible. And do you mind us asking a little bit? You mentioned it, like how you got into it is you'd got into some trouble yourself. Would you tell us a little bit about like your story, your experience that you had, what maybe led to it?
Yeah, I grew up in a single parent household. My grandparents were around, but we lost Nan at 30. I was 13 when we lost Nan. She died from aneurysm, and big shock to us all because she was fit and healthy. Really, just didn't expect that. Just so quick. Yeah, not gonna lie, it put a real dent in the family, all of us, me and my
Yeah.
my brothers, everybody involved. But we didn't have a rich life. Poverty was quite there. Don't get me wrong. I don't mean homeless, but we weren't the best off. My mother was struggling with her mental health, and things like that, and my nan was claiming pension, and you know, back in the day, it was the kind of the normal thing to do. Really, my nan was claiming pension, but there's a thing they call used to work on the races.
Oh, right. Okay.
She's going to do that cash in hand. And just to make ends meet. Really, that's the life we had. Just to make ends meet. And when we lost Nan, obviously we struggled even more then. Financially, and led me into the path of drug dealing. Really, growing where we grew up, it was quite brutal. What it's like today with kids today. It was no different when we were kids. Really, if you haven't got the right gear, you haven't got the right clothes, you haven't got the right environment, you haven't got the right people you hang around with, you kind of ostracized a little bit. So it was quite a thing. And I had two younger brothers as well. My mum was attracted, sometimes to violent men. That was a difficult time. The gentleman that my mum was going out with at the time, after we lost Nan, and he's very violent to her, and
Mm.
I was stepping into
And
fighting.
how old were you then, was?
13,
Wow.
13, and my two younger brothers, they were roughly about the middle one. My second brother would have been about 9. My youngest brother would have been about 6, something like that. And I protect them a lot, as well,
Yeah.
because after he took his anger out on mum, and I try to fight him, he would try and take the anger out on my brothers, and I wouldn't have that, So I would say I play like a protector role, really,
Mm.
um, within the family. And obviously we needed money, badly. Food was always low. Financially wasn't always the best, and eviction letters for the door a lot. Not paying the rent, and I just felt that the only way I could try and deal with that is get involved in drug dealing, really. And I've been asked before to get involved in that, and I've always said no before. Like, no, I'm not doing that. And but when I needed that money, that quick fix, then yeah,
Mm.
I knocked on the right person's door, and they said, yeah, what have I got to do? And that's like end up babysitting. Then they call it, babysitting, sitting as what people call it now, a trap house or a bando.
Mm.
And I just be sitting on drugs, Uh, Back then, when I was growing up, it was all about cocaine and pills. Ecstasy, the old Donkey Kongs, as they call them. And so I'd be sat on those in a house, and then once I've done that, a gentleman would rock up and pay me my money, and then I go and buy shopping, end up paying the rent. Back then, you could go to the local council office, couldn't you? And you
Yeah.
could pay at the local housing, your rent. And so I get the book and I go and do that and pay the rent, and just kept doing that really. And I'm not gonna lie to you, the money was nice, and it just ties into how I work with young people really, because what I
Mm.
do here, I talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of it, of that world. And I say out to young people as well, I never tell them what to do, and I never tell them what not to do either. I'm just giving you factual information here. Like,
Yeah.
it looks good, I'm not gonna lie, I can see why you're attracted to that. But at the same time, when it doesn't end well. No matter how you spin it, it won't end well for you. And I'm a perfect example of that, really.
And I think when you're that age, you haven't, it's not like when we were growing up, you could maybe get a paper round. Even then, you were talking about a couple of quid. If you've not got a family that comes from money and you're not legally allowed to start working until you're sort of 16, your
Yeah,
options are thin, aren't they, on what you can actually do. And if you can see that your mum's having a hard time, clearly from what you were saying, she struggled with her mental health but was in abusive relationships. You're the oldest man in the house that isn't someone that's, assaulting her. You can see how yourself and lots of other people get into that world because you just don't feel like you've got any other options.
yeah, and also a lot of the time, home wasn't a place where I wanted to be. Do you know what I mean? Because of that, which I'm not blaming that mind to push me into that, because I've always said there's always a what I call social indicators. You can't say factors, because that means there's no element of responsibility. So I call them indicators. There's indicators what may lead a young person into that. It can be the full reason. I'll always be honest about that. It's not always the full reason. However, though, in my situation, that look, I can be honest. I know a lot of people on podcasts who are gangsters and they've done real big and bad things. I haven't done that. That's not the case here. And I didn't want to be big and I didn't want to be bad. That's the God's honest truth. I didn't want that.
Mm,
I just wanted to get by with me and my brothers, really. I just wanted to get by. That's all I wanted. I didn't want nothing else. But when the violence comes with it, then obviously, when you're in that world, it's you got to defend yourself. And unfortunately, I had to defend myself a lot, not at home, but on the street as well, when I'm out dealing
mm,
and things like that, and all the risks that come with it. So yeah, you're absolutely right. They are indicators, and sometimes when you're 13 and your father's not around at the time, my
mm.
biological father, he wasn't around, and that's happening at home. What am I supposed to do? I can't leave my brother's there like that. Like I just can't do it. We didn't trust police, which is in the conversation. You'd be surprised actually. It was a police officers that got me out of their life. From a positive role model perspective. So, but when we did speak to, when I did with the police at a young age, hence why care and things like that come into play. And my grandfather ended up, you know, wanting me to come back and live with him, really. Uh, and completely turn it around. So yeah, so I understand what that looks like for young people. I really do. And in terms of grief, I was still grieving for my grandmother. Never really understood it until now. Even now, really, I still think about her. There's not a day I don't think about her.
Mm.
I miss her every day. There's sometimes when you're going through life, and that's the thing I think with grief. I'm sure we'll talk about later on. It's the little things.
Yeah, it's the little side swipe cycle, then the bits you're not expecting. Where I was saying to Jamie, my fiance, we were driving down to London. God, this was a few months ago now, and my great nan lived in Tottenham. So when I grew up, that's where I used to go spend my 6 weeks holidays at her house. Like
Yeah,
all that's where I spent all of my spare time. I literally was obsessed with her, and I'm very fortunate that I had my nan and my great nan in my life. So I've had loads of sort of positive female figures. So I get it when you talk about your nan, because God, I'm obsessed with mine. Um, and we were driving past a sign and it said Tottenham, and instantly my head went, oh, we'll go and pop in and see Nan. She's been passed away for 9 years. But
Yeah.
my head, it's like the cognitive side of it, that connection's still there, where I look at that and I go, oh, that's where my Nan is. I'll go and see her. Well, there's nowhere for me to go and see, but it is those little things where you think, God, I can't believe my brain is still connecting that so many years on, but it obviously does.
Yeah, I'm the same as you. I was lucky enough to meet both my great grandparents, my granddad's parents. Lovely people, my great granddad, hence the name Cunliffe. Even though I got a Welsh accent, my great grandfather's from a small town in Durham called Trimdon, and he met my great grandmother, obviously, and he decided to live his life in Wales, but I was obsessed with him a bit as well when I was told he was in World War II, and he was a soldier there, in the Desert Rats, so he was a hero figure to me, really, Granby Tom, big hero figure in my life, and my Nana Gwyn as well was also a prominent figure in my life as well, and like I said, I was lucky to have, my great granddad died at 81. I was about 12, I think, when he passed away, and my great grandmother passed away when I was about 19, 20. She died in her 90s, and so she was a prominent part of my life as well, really. And like you said, there's little cognitive triggers that happens really when we used to go and see her every week. My granddad's mum, and at the time she was in a home, and she wouldn't eat much, like meals, but if you had a chocolate eclair or anything like that, do you know what I mean? She'd have that. Do you know what I mean? Like the nurse would come in and say, here's your dinner, Gwyn. She's like, oh, I'm not hungry, love, I don't want that. And then I go, well, if you're not hungry, then I'll put these cakes. No, I'll have them. She'll snatch them in my hand. No, I'll have them. And sometimes I go in Asda, even now, I'm in Asda or Morrison's, I see these eclairs, I go and pick them up, like, oh no, she's not here. Like, because that was like a routine, every week, and when I got older and I got a bit more responsible, I used to go down sometimes and collect her pension, from the post office. And now and again, I've pulled up the post office. I've gone, oh yeah, oh no, she's not here no more. So I get what you mean. Like those little triggers that you get in your mind, and I think that's very overlooked, really, because I walk through Tesco or Asda and I just laugh, and my family go, "Why are you laughing at that?" I just my Nana Gwyn comes to my head. Do you know what I mean? About she's clear, Scott, and the top roll off. She was diabetic as well. Do you know what I mean? And I mentioned that to her, and she was like, "Well, I'm in my 90s now." I was like, "Yeah, fair enough now."
Yeah, I'll do what I want, thanks.
Yeah, fair enough.
Sounds very much like my great nan, because she was the same. She's like, "Well, I'm 85 now. I'll do what I want. I don't need any of you telling me what to do. Thanks."
Yeah, and I think it's a shame, really, that I know this podcast is not about that, but in terms of grieving, I think that generation is now gone, and when you had strong, sturdy people in your life, and they were that, they were that, even though they're my great grandparents, because I had a close relationship with my grandfather, they were more or less my grandparents.
That's similar to me, because my nan sort of supported my mum in growing in bringing us up. So my great grandma I would view almost like my nan, and then I see my nan as like a second mum. So I think it's probably very similar experience. And I think we were talking about it before, when you've had grandparents that have grown up, like my nan used to like work in factories and stuff like that, they make you a different kind of person in terms of I keep seeing these things pop up on social media now, and I keep thinking, I wish that was about when my great grandma was still here, because I would love to have asked her. And they do these books where you're supposed to give them to like your mum, your nan, your dad, someone like that, and it's got all different questions about their life in it, and then they write it out. You give it to them as like, for a birthday or Mother's Day or something like that, and then they give it back to you, and you get to read almost like their biography as if they were famous. All these, I would love to have kind of, when you think, I wish I'd asked more questions, I wish I'd found out more, but
Do you know what? I was quite inquisitive of my great grandparents. I was. My grandpa Tom. He's one of the biggest heroes of my life. Well, the minute I found out he was in World War II and he served in the Desert Rats, and yeah, he was a hero for me then. You know, he was always a hero. But when I got told that, I was blown away even more by him. You know, but he was a quiet man. You know, when I go and visit him, he was a quiet man, and it's not what you think. You know, like somebody who served in World War II, and he never really spoke about it. You know, he never really spoke about it. And even my Nana Gwyn used to say, Tom would never speak about it. Even when he come home, never really, even till the day he died, never really spoke of it much. We know he
probably experienced a lot of grief himself.
100% he did, 100%. But when I speak to my great grandmother, and she'd tell me about the blackout, Drina, so what do you mean, Nan? She goes, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock at night, candles, lights gone, the German bombers, they can't see the mines, they can't see the works. I go, what? She go, yeah, blackout, the country be gone, black, like all night in that era, you know. I thought, what? And she's like, yeah, the blackout. That's what it was then. And she was like, you could be sat there watching TV and bam, just a bomb drop on you. Like it was horrendous, you know. I was like, wow. And believe it or not, my great grandmother during that time, she was a crane driver.
No way.
You know, because a lot of the men went to war, you know, then, and everybody mixed in. And that's the point I'm making, you know, about, I think when you speak to people like that, and you've got people like that in your life, they've got a lot of wisdom and knowledge to pass on to you, you know, in situations and things like that. And when she was telling me, she goes, yeah, I was a crane driver. And I'm like, what? And
I love that.
very inquisitive of her. And she's like, yeah, crane driver. My granddad was just a young boy then, you know, during that time. And he worked in the mines, not as a miner, but his first job was like, you know, feeding the ponies and watching them, making sure they were fed and, you know, cleaning out the heels and things like that. And I thought, wow. And my granddad then, ever since then, really, so from the age of 8, really, my granddad never really missed a day's work since then, you know, since 8 years old. You know, obviously today that'd be looked at in a different light. I'd be like,
no, you couldn't, yeah.
You can't do that. But, you know, with the morals and that they had and the things they tell me, you know, and my nan told me, you know, she was only young herself during the war. My granddad's wife, my nan, my mother's mother, she's only young and she's driving around the local village, you know, driving the milk and bread van. You know, and police officers walked past, and the police knew she was underage. But the point I was making, they're trying to say to me was that was what a community was. You know, it was that time. Everybody got together. And everybody, whether you were 8, 9, 10, 20, 50, man or woman, everybody had a role to play. And when she was telling me these stories, I was like, oh my God. I was like, wow, just so over the moon with it. You know, and I learned so much from that. You know, when I spoke to my great grandmother. Just couldn't believe it. And when you mentioned earlier talking about men and their feelings, obviously back in those days, obviously parents would give their children a good smack, right? A good whack.
Yeah, good hiding.
And now the misconception is, right, and I'm guilty of it as well. The misconception, I said, "Oh, was Grampy Tom hard on you, Dad?" You know, he said no. He said my dad never laid a finger on me. I said what? He said our dad never touched us. He goes, our man. He said our man was the one. I said, really? He went, oh. He said, our man was the one.
Yeah.
He said, our man was brutal as well.
It was like that in my house. My dad never smacked me once, but I'll tell you what, if I needed telling off, it'd be my mother.
Yeah, honestly, I was like, what? Because you think Grampy Tom, you know, soldier, World War II, tough. And he must be a tough man to, you know, to deal with that, tough guy. And you think it'd be him. He was like, no. He said, our dad never touched us. He said, our dad never even raised his voice to us. He said, our man was the one. Our man was the one. I was
Kept
like, oh,
us
really?
in line.
I was like, wow. He said, yeah. He said, our dad would just say, look, just behave yourself. He said, our man would go out the slipper with the thickest heel. I was like, wow, that's absolutely crazy. When you speak to people like that, and like now they're gone, Nana Gwyn and Grampy Tom. I miss them so much. I think people don't understand. They go, oh, they're old, and I'm like, no, they're people, and they're people I love very dearly, and I miss them. And even when I talk to young people now, I still use some of the influence on me, on the young people, how they talk to me, and how to talk to people, what that looks like. And it's an amazing thing, really. You know, I miss them dearly. I think about them all the time, you know. And when I used to play rugby, if we used to play on Armistice weekend, I'd always have Grampy's Tom banded on my arm all the time. Respect for him and all the other brave men and women that served, you know. And I always have Nana Gwyn on it as well because, you know, she also served, really. You know, when she told me she's a crane driver, I just couldn't get over that. I was like, what?
Yeah,
Like,
but it's
what?
the community figure, isn't it? And I think
Yeah.
you're so right in what you say. Like, we don't really have those now. So when you're growing up, it's, I suppose it's one of those where maybe you still get it on certain areas where everyone looks out for everyone's kids and stuff like that, but not really. It doesn't feel like that as much anymore. It's sort of everybody for their own little family and bubble. And I get that. I understand that because I think, you've got to make sure that you're looking after yourselves. But if you've got a family where a kid is going and maybe a little bit awry, then it I don't know if you would have got away with it back then as
No,
much as you would
I,
now.
absolutely. I think the culture has shifted a little bit. Like, you know, even though I'm mid-30s, and so I like to think I'm still quite relatively young, but compared to some of my peers, obviously I was raised by my grandparents who, you know, of their era again had a different moral compass, you know,
Mm.
to when things moved, you know. You know, like the people who raised me were born in the 30s, you know, so they were raised in a Teddy Boy era, you know, when what we call nightclubbing, they call it we're going to the dance. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And you know, we say that the pub shut at midnight, their night ended at 9:30. Do you know what I mean? And things like that. And if you have children, you know, you got to put food in the bellies, clothes on the back, and keep the house warm. You know, like
Mm.
those kind of morals. And when they told me about how things were, you know, I know each area is different, but like in the valleys in particular, you know, like by the way they were telling me, it's all about family. It's all about family, and it's also about your neighbours and your friends. It's about everybody involved, and I think that kind of culture has shifted a little bit. And when I listen to my grandparents and my great grandparents telling me how things were and what things were like, um, is that saying if it takes a village to raise a child, then it'll take one to neglect one too.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean?
Wow.
And I think that is the case here because, like you said, if a young person goes awry, um, the local police officer would know, and then that local police officer would tell everybody in the vicar. Do you know what I mean? And the community would get involved with
Mm.
this young person to try and steer him in a different path. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? You know, so and I think that's kind of missing a little bit, really. So, and I think as a whole, I think a lot of people grieve that as well. Like that kind of community feeling is gone. You know, the days are gone now. We used to go, oh, my grandson will go and do that for you. You know, or
Yeah.
I get my boy to go run that round there for you, or I get my daughter to come and pop check it on you while we're away and things like that. Or you go on holiday, don't worry, my daughter's here all week, or my son's here all week, and I'll make
Mm.
sure we'll check in and we'll put your bins out for you. Da-da-da. You know, all those the small things in life. That's what I mean, the little things, the small things in life. I think that makes a community. I think that's kind of gone out of the picture now. Is kind of as long as I'm okay, Jack.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that has a massive effect as well on people.
Yeah, I agree. So what led to you kind of getting out of that life of crime?
Yeah. So when I got into rugby, so I got into rugby very late, and that's kind of unusual for your typical Welshman. You know, when I play rugby with my friends now, a lot of them play rugby since they were under eights, if not younger. You know what I mean? And I didn't start till my late teens.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, and you have to look it up. You have to go onto YouTube. The Welsh Rugby Union has done a piece on me about how I turned it around. But rugby was a tool for me. to get out. And I come via an orthodox route, so I went on a program called the School of Hard Knocks, and it's a charity, but they use rugby to help people
Wow.
get back into life, you know. And when I was on that program, I met loads of people. Like obviously me, I'm trying to get back into way of life from crime, you know, with, you know, mistakes that I made, and I got to make up for those mistakes. But there's other people there who were homeless, people who were recovering in addiction, you know, all kinds of people there, and we were all there for the same common purpose. We all move forward and move straight. And I got involved in rugby that way, and I really liked it. I liked the program. You know, they use rugby as a tool, and the things you learn from rugby, you actually carry on in later life, believe it or not. And people don't believe this because as you can tell, I don't shut up, right? But when I was a kid, I didn't speak. I was quiet. I was kind of laid back. You know, I'm laid back there, but I was quiet. Didn't say much. But when I went to rugby, it taught me how to communicate. You know, it showed me what teamwork was, what proper teamwork was, and it showed me what problem solving was. And it also showed me how to negotiate and be social as well in a positive manner. You know, in a very positive manner. And well, I enjoyed rugby, so I started playing for a local team, Tredegar. I was with my granddad up in Blenavon, which is like not that far away from Tredegar, and so I was playing locally there. And I was playing one game, and after the game, I got on the car with my dad. My dad said a chairman from Ebervale wants, you know, and the coach wants to give him a call tomorrow. They watch you play, they like the look of you. I was like, what? And it's like Ebervale. They were like, yeah. I was like in terms of rugby, you know, in Wales, you know, Ebervale's got a rich history in rugby, you know, and there's our players like Clive Burgess play from, you know, and you know, legends like that. And Ebervale again is a rugby based town, so if Ebervale was a house, then the rugby club would definitely be its kitchen. Do you know what I mean? That's the kind of a community that it is. And like I said, the lack of self-esteem and that male figure in my life, or that role model, whether it's man or woman, that role model in my life, my dad was that person. And he said, you're going to give him a call tomorrow. You hear me? I was like, yeah, Dad, yeah, I'll give him a call tomorrow. So I gave him a call. And I went training in the summer. And they just said, yeah, we like you a lot, and we want you to stay and play for us. So basically going to semi-professional rugby. And I was like, whoa. Oh, okay. And I went home and I didn't know. And like you said, grieving. There was two Weses at conflict with each other. You got the Wes that wants to move forward, and then there was the Wes that wanted to stay where he was because that's all he knew and that's all he could have control of. So, and my dad just sat me down and he said, look, only not long ago, he said, I was watching the doctor save your life, you know, my grandson. And he said, your nan's not here. And he said, listen, he said, come up the valleys with me properly. He said, get away from that shit. He said, for good, you know, and he said, this is your chance to walk away for life. He said, this is your chance now to walk away. So I did. I took the opportunity. I took the leap, you know, the unknown, and I did that. And that's what turned it around for me, really. But the real catalyst was when one time I was out dealing, and that's when the light first started turning. And I was out dealing one night, and I sold some drugs to a gentleman, and about an hour and a half later, a lady approached me, pushing a pram with two little toddlers in, and she said, "You don't remember me, do you?" And I looked at her, and I took me 10 minutes. I said, "Yeah, I remember who you are now." And she was a former user, you know, drug user, but she's got clean now, you know, and she's turned it around as well, and she's got her children back, and her ex-partner, the children's father, nicked her savings that she had on drugs, and I saw the little baby sat there, and you know, and she's on her knees begging me, and I felt really bad, so I give her the money back.
Oh wow!
And I asked the guy to give me the drugs back, and I was walking back, and I felt really bad, you know. I know a lot of people will go, "Oh, I don't care, money's money," but I don't know. Something hit me about that. About when I saw those two little kids in the pram, you know. I thought, if I'm not giving that money back, like, what would have happened to that young family, and she was honest. She said that will only get me through 3 days. She said, but I get paid in 5, so I was like, oh. So I give her the money back, and then I started to change a little bit. Like, no, I'm contributing to the poison in the community. I'm contributing to that. And I was like, no, I got to stop doing that. This is not right. This is not right. And unfortunately, like a week or two later, that's when the unfortunate happened, when I got attacked and got stabbed, and which made me walk away from that life for good anyway, But the cogs are finally, turning and the lights are coming on, and I was like, I don't want to do this no more. And so when I got the rugby, and then I got that opportunity to coach young people, things like that. And my dad actually said, he said, I think you're born to work with people, because I was doing like forklift driving, and I was learning a trade like plastering and things like that. I didn't think about doing any of this. I'm not gonna lie to you, Shannon. Honestly, I didn't really think about doing anything like this. And my dad said he thinks I was born to work with people, and in my street, and that's, like I said, I started to get better and better. And in my street, there's a gentleman who, opposite me, there was a home for adults with learning difficulties, and he loved Liverpool. He absolutely loved Liverpool, and he was about 40 odd then, but I think he functioned about 4 or 5. You can see that, and lovely man, didn't bother anybody, didn't hurt anybody. And I was sat outside, and I was on my license, and I was sat outside, and I just saw a group of boys who I knew, dealers, and they were picking on him, and they were taking his money off him and slapping him about a bit. And I just ran over and I said, listen, leave him be, give him his money back, leave him alone, he's done, leave him. And after that, then he's like, oh, you're my friend, you are, you're my friend, 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 you're my friend. I was like, oh, what have I got myself into? And every day then he would come to the house, and he wouldn't bother you, like, in that way, just every day he'd knock on the door, hi, like, come on in. And he'd come in, and he'll go, he'd pat me on the head, you go, thank you. I said, it's all right, bud. I said, do you want to put your Liverpool DVD on? And you go, yeah. I go on in. I said, do you want your chocolate biscuits? He went, yeah, go on, yeah, yes, please. And he'll do that, and that's the kind of thing, really. And I was like, wow. And my dad said, like, he said, you're good at talking, dealing with people. And I was like, oh, and I got the coaching and really enjoyed that. And I got into rugby, and when I played for Ebervale, and listen, I've had the pleasure, the opportunity to play for 2 other great clubs as well. Played for my hometown Newport, the Black and Ambers. Not many young people can say that, so I'm one of those lucky ones that can say I've played for my hometown, my home city. I've also played for Cross Keys, also lovely club, great history as well. But Ebervale was very special. That's where everything turned around for me. Everything changed. Yeah. Everything did. Everything. My life, my friendship group, my outlook on life, my outlook on people. Everything changed. I didn't trust nobody. Didn't trust anybody at all. Because the world I come from is either snake or be snaked. It's one of those worlds. So trusting people is very hard for me. And when you've got supporters coming up to you, saying that you're a very good player, welcome to the club, and then people are telling me that there's kids there who are I was their favorite player. I was end up being a role model for these young people, and I couldn't believe that the emotional battle that was going on was unreal, absolutely unreal.
Yeah, I can imagine, just from your sort of. I think it sounds like you said your kind of self-worth was probably quite low at times, and then when you've got people going, "You're my favorite, I love you," and I can't wait to watch you play. I bet your head's going, What do you mean? Why are you bothered about me? Why are you interested in me for?
100% it was, and when parents come at me saying my kids love you, and it's not about race, but these are white kids.
Yeah.
And it's not about race. My mother's white, my granddad's white. I'm mixed race, it's not about race, but
plays a part though, Wes. It's one of them, isn't it? It's like you can't ignore it. If that's played a part in your life, it's played a part in your life, isn't it? And there's no doubt it would have done.
These kids didn't see, and the supporters, these people, they didn't see colour. They just saw a human being, Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? I'm part of the team. I'm part of the club. I'm part of the family, as they say. And I don't know how ironic this was. I end up being supported by Ebervale churches together, right? So turning good, and then end up being sponsored by a church. I was like, hang on, there's
Some
something at
sort of
work here.
joke.
There's something at work here. I'm not sure if nobody else wanted to sponsor me because they heard about my past, but the church have gone, we'll sponsor him. Somebody deserves a second chance at life. Maybe, I don't
Aw.
know, but it was just very ironic. I ended up being sponsored by the church, and made a lot of mistakes, but I that made me trust people again. And like I said, young people said I was one of their favorite players. I have phone calls off my coaches saying, can you attend the under nines presentation night? They want you there. The under
Oh.
11s, they want you there. And I was, now to other people, that's probably the norm. For me, that was a big thing. I was like, what? Like,
Mm.
before I was just a blight on a community, somebody that was making the community worse. And I've gone from that to that. The massive shift, like I said, the two
Yeah.
Weses was a constant battle of themselves. And I think I had to mourn the old Wes, and this is now the new Wes, and
Mm.
people to this day, when I tell them what I've done, they go, I cannot put that to you. Like the person they see now, they cannot put that to you. And
Mm.
I took on the advice from my great grandmother. You always say please, you always say thank you, you always open a door for a lady,
Mm.
you always be polite to the ladies, always be polite to your elders, and if you don't, it's one of them. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I still do it to this day. I go to the chemist and I see an elderly
Mm.
person walk in. They're about half a mile away. I still hold the door open because if I don't, I get that. I'm going to duck over like nan's like, still get the duck. And I took that in the life of me. But when I did the School of Hard Knocks rugby, taught me to communicate, and I sat with the Reverend there at Ebbvale, Jeff Waggett, and he was a nice man, and he listened to a lot of the problems I had, and a lot of things I was facing, and he really helped me out with that at the club. Really, he would take his time, his time to come and see me, and after training and talk to me, and after games on a Saturday to talk to me, and sometimes you'll ring me in the week, and just to catch up with me and things like that. And I was honest, I was taking drugs, like while I was dealing, I was taking base and speed and things like that, to keep yourself up, if you're dealing.
Yeah.
And things like that, and withdrawing from taking a lot of drugs and things like that. And I speak to him about it, and he was telling me, I'm making the right choices. And the police officers at the time that arrested me and got me, when I got arrested at the time for carrying drugs, but after I got stabbed, the police officers, also the local bobbies, would come and see me play rugby and support as well, and try and keep me on the straight and narrow. And but the biggest person in that is my dad. From day one, he was there, getting me the training, taking me the training, and sat there. And when I, like you said, that lack of self-worth, he would make sure
Mm.
that I didn't feel that way, and things like that. And so, yeah, it was a crazy thing. And as I said, my journey to rugby is a very unorthodox one in terms of Wales, very unorthodox. I didn't come through no academy system. I didn't come
Yeah.
through that. And a lot of people will go, well, that's all right. And it is okay. And it's a good thing. The reason I shout about it is I represent and I speak for the kids who also feel that way.
Yeah.
And the people I support, not just men and men, young women as well, young girls, whatever, whoever comes from that background, similar as me, I shout out like you can.
Yeah, you've got options because I think that's it sometimes, isn't it? It's feeling like you don't have any other choice. Whereas what you've kind of show is it's inspirational, really, because it's going even when it gets shit, even when it's as bad as you think it can possibly be. Like you said, you've been stabbed, you've been arrested, you've been put in care. That doesn't have to remain there because a lot of people at that point would kind of wallow in self-pity and go, do you know what, this is just my life, this is what I was meant to do, I was supposed to kind of lead this life, I'm not worthy of a better one. And it sounds like you had some great people around you that kind of tapped you on the shoulder that weren't family, and actually probably that community that we need a little bit more of, going, Wes, you've got this, you've got this, you're doing really well, keep going. Everybody wants you to do well. You just want to, we want you to want to do well for yourself now. And that's, you can do whatever you want to achieve.
Absolutely. And, like you said, community. And when it helped me trust people again, like it was one game, we played away somewhere, and I was getting some racism from the side, from the away supporters. I was getting from the home supporters, like from their team. I was getting some racism, but even when we played away, because Enville liked their rugby so much, it felt like a home game because the town would be emptied, to come and watch the game. And I think the supporters got wind I was getting some grief on the other side, so about 150 of the supporters just come waltzing around on the other side, just to say, like, you're not on your own here, Wes. Do you know what I mean? You're not on your own. And that and like things like that really got me involved with people. And then, and this is not me bragging, this is what my dad spoke to me about, really, is that, like, that year I won the award of Supporters Player of the Year. And when before he died in 2018, we were looking back on it, and when I left Eberville and I played for Newport, I also got Young Mascots Player of the Year as well with Newport. And my dad sat me down and he said, does that not tell you what you need to know? I was like, what do you mean? He's like, you are well liked by the people, and he said, yeah, it'd be great. He said, to get players player, and he said, it'd be nice to get coaches player, but he said, you had Supporters Player of the Year. Like the people who pay to come and watch you play. You had their vote. Clearly you connect with the people.
Make an impact, yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't look at it like that. And like I said, that mentality is that community that he grew up in, that's what it was. And I think, and he passed that on to me, and he was right in what he was saying. I didn't look at it like that. My self-worth, my self-confidence was shot. Like, and people, like in rugby, even though they're good, I made some real nice friends, I don't think they really understood, like, what it was. Like, when I used to speak to them, like, what was you doing at 12? And they're like, oh, going to Portugal, going to Porthcawl, going to, Butlins. What was you doing, Wes? Stopped my mother from getting a black eye. Complete disparity, completely different, completely different. But what the rugby taught me was that I had some skills and abilities, and they could be used in a positive way. Which I didn't look at like that. And it taught me to communicate, and it taught me to problem solve, and it taught me to work as a team, which you need to take into everyday employment, no matter what job you do, whether that's in a bank, to work in the council, to working in IT, to working as a mechanic. If you cannot communicate, deal with people, work as a team, problem solve, then you're going to struggle in life, and rugby taught me that.
Definitely. And I think that's with any relationship, isn't it? Communication. If you've not got communication, you've not got anything. I noticed that you call your granddad Dad.
Yeah.
So that, I love that anyway, but it sounds like he really just was that figure in your life that you needed at that time. I know you mentioned before we started recording that he passed away in 2018. What impact did that have on you?
Do you know what? It was a massive impact. I get emotional thinking about him all the time, really, because he's a very prominent person in my life, really. And there's not a day I don't think about him. There's not a day where I miss the phone calls if I need advice about something. I go and see him. And he had prostate cancer for a long time. I think got diagnosed it in his 50s, and I think the treatment was working. But when he turned, in his 80s, and things like that, I think obviously his body started rejecting, the treatment and stuff. And when we were told that he only had like 9-10 months left, because he said, he felt it and things like that. I never really spoke out loud about it really until today, really, because that was a different part of my life. But I fell out of love with rugby a little bit when I lost him. I fell out of love with rugby a little bit. People call that weak, but it's not that. It's we took that journey together.
Yeah, it's a connection you had to him, and when he's not here, naturally your connection to that thing that you love, it changes.
Yeah, and he was, you know, like I said, he was at all my games. He was he's my biggest fan, but he was also my biggest critic, you know. And when, you know, when I lost him, you know, and the grieving bit for him was hard because now we know that the clock is counting down, you know, and there's absolutely nothing I can do, absolutely nothing I can do. And sorry if you can feel, you know, I'm coming across emotional, but
No, I think that's important though. That's genuine.
it's a tough one because all the years that he helped me, there's nothing I could do to help him.
I bet you did though. You just don't know it. You would have done it because I think when you have to remember your granddad also lost his partner, right? His wife. And
Yeah,
it felt like from the way that you spoke that you became his focus. You probably helped him through dark patches that you don't even realize because he would have been grieving the woman that he loved, his partner, his, who he dedicated his life to, and you
yeah,
gave him focus. You gave him something to be proud of.
yeah. I'm not doing it wrong. I know he's very proud, and like I said, even you know, I got a son. I got two children. I got a daughter, and I got a son. You know, and my daughter we'll come to in a bit. You know, but my son, he was born premature and 3.5 months premature, and we nearly lost him a few times along the way, and
Mm.
he was there by my side. Do you know what I mean? He was there, even going through his own cancer treatment. He was there by my side. You know, and he was, you know, he's like, it's my great grandson. Do you know what I mean? He's like, I'm not missing. I'm
Mm.
not missing out on seeing that. And it was nice because even my son Isaiah had a relationship with my granddad. You know, for a few years. I think my son was about
Yeah.
7 when Dad passed away. Um, So, and even now, my son goes, "Oh, um, he get a bit emotional sometimes. He says, I miss Grampy." Do you know what I mean? And things like that. And because he's got learning difficulties, my son, you know, and he
Mm.
says he misses Grampy and things like that. So it shows the impact not just on my life, but on my son's life as well. You know that
Mm.
for the time that he was here. And don't get me wrong, mind, he had his faults. He had his faults, my dad. He wasn't perfect by a long stretch, but you know, but in terms for me, like what he's done for me and how he helped me get out of the life and how he helped me turn it around and supported me, um, there's no words for it really, completely no words. And you can see on his face, you know, when he come to rugby and he'd be sat there with the gentleman having the beer and he's enjoying life. You know, you can see that he was
Yeah.
enjoying life. But it's, you know, when I spoke with him at the time, you know, when he come back from Velindre, that's a cancer hospital in Wales, you know, and they said he can, you know, if he has radiotherapy, it can prolong his life for a couple of years. And you know, sometimes I battle myself about it. Where we had a couple of arguments where I said I think you should have the treatment, and he didn't want the treatment, and things like that. And you know, but you know, I can understand it. You know, looking back right now, you know, the 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 grandson in me was being selfish, you know. I wanted to keep him around for as long as I could, but you know, the human being as a friend in me, I understood why he took that decision not to have the treatment to
Mm.
prolong his life, you know. And but it was just awful knowing that, you know, counting down the clock. It was just awful knowing that, you know, he's not going to be here next Christmas. You know, you know, he's not going to be here ever again. And it was
Mm.
tough. It was tough. Um, I cared for him for the last 7, 8 months of his life. Really, before he went into St David's care. By the way, fantastic charity, fantastic people, lovely. You know, they're amazing. And I would whoever listens to this podcast and if they can, please donate to St David's because they're absolutely amazing people. You know, the work that they do. They looked after my dad so well, so well. They were amazing. Uh, but you know, when I was looking after my dad in his bungalow at the time before he moved into St David's, um, you know, I never really spoke about it with Newport Rugby, and I felt bad for not speaking to him about it. You know, but like I said, we didn't have the money to put him into a care home. You know, we
Mm.
didn't have the money for that, and things. You know, and we didn't have the money to have people to come out and see him all the time, and you know, so we filled in the gaps. You know, but I thought the least I could do looking after him. You know, but it was just awful knowing. You know, it's just like I'm not going to see you again. It was absolutely, it was horrendous, absolutely horrendous.
Mm.
And then when he died, um, you know, that day, and and my uncle Carl was sorting out the funeral and things like that. 'Cause like I said, even though I was very close to my dad, he was very traditional. The oldest deals with it, and that was my uncle
Mm.
Carl, the firstborn of my granddad, and my mother's the youngest, see. So my uncle Carl dealt with everything, and
Yeah.
um, it's the longest 2 weeks of my life. The longest 2 weeks of my life, that funeral, the longest ever. Everything just went so slow. And like I said, I fell out of love with rugby a little bit, and I was playing for Newport at the time, and when he first fell ill, and I kind of stepped back from him really. I just fell out of love with it, and I was playing for Cross Keys when he passed away, and yeah, I just fell out of love with rugby a bit, because it just didn't feel the same without him. Without him there, it just didn't feel the same.
Mm.
Those phone calls you get on a Friday, you picking me up tomorrow, you're looking forward to tomorrow, yeah. Doing things like that, and you're like, you got on training this week, yeah, Dad, yeah, and after the game on a Saturday, we have a couple of beers, and then take him home, and we go and have a Chinese or a fish and chips together. That was always our thing, and I knew he'd look forward to that, like you said, he would
Yeah.
really look forward to that, but just knowing that's not going to happen again, he's a brave man for asking the question, how long have I got? Because
Mm.
I said to him, Dad, why would you want to know that? And but yeah, just I miss him. I miss him every day. I miss him every day, and my nan, miss them all every day. Like I said, advice, wisdom, knowledge, things like that.
Mm.
They're they're the kind of people I want to speak to,
Yeah.
and say, Dad, I got this going on. What do you think? And I'm trying to start my own business now, and I know my dad at the time had his own business. Before I was born,
Yeah.
he had his own business, and he would have given me a lot of pointers and tips how to do that, and how to look after your money and things like that, and things like that you miss really, like from him, and as a parent as well, I'd be like, I want to do this, Dad. What do you think? And
Mm.
and I went through a tough time with my daughter, because I was involved in the life, and like I said, I'm being honest as a man here. I haven't been the best father at this point to my daughter.
Mm.
She's 14 now, and obviously me and her mum, fell out and whatnot. And like I said, I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't the best. I don't think I was the best at the time. My self-worth was gone, and I felt my daughter was better off without me. And like I said, my dad would advise me on what to do there. 'Cause I wanted to fight to see her, and things like that.
Yeah.
And you know, um, and he was a big part of that with me as well. On that, he supported me through that. Do you know what I mean? He supported me through that tough time, trying to see my daughter, and getting to see my daughter and things like that. And never really spoke to him about that really, my daughter and that and all that. And the reason we didn't see her for a while was it's not Dad's fault, but I was taking care of Dad.
Yeah.
And with his cancer and things like that. Because when it spread from his prostate, it went into his nymph gland. So it went into his
Wow.
shoulder. It was in his spine. So I can imagine why he didn't want the treatment. You could tell the pain he was in and
Mm.
things like that. And when he's telling me the Euromorph is not working, then clearly he's in a lot of pain. And
Jesus.
so I was looking after him on that. And yeah, I had to step back from my daughter a little bit, but and that's why I said, that's why I think I connect with young people. I get it. You're facing these things, and it's what they call ACEs, really. Adverse childhood experiences, and I think that gets overlooked a lot. And I think
Mm.
grief is part of that.
Definitely. And I'm going for a bit of a conversation where I work at the moment, where I'm trying to get grief to be spoken about in the workplace as well, because I think, like you said, you found it hard to talk to the rugby club that you played for at the time. Most companies, they give you sort of, some are better than others, but their standard in your contract is if you lose someone as a close family member, and that's usually a parent, in some cases not grandparent, it's 2 days, the day they pass away and the day of the funeral. That's sort of what you're entitled to. And if you don't get sick leave or anything like that, and I just think grief can have such impact on people, and it plays out in so many different ways. Like you said, when you saw our podcast pop up, it made you think about, well, actually losing my grandma, that played a part in where I ended up going in my life. And then when you've lost your granddad or your dad, it's saying to you, well, what do I want to do now? And it's a shame Laura's not able to join us this week, because she has that a lot. She lost her mum a couple of years ago now, be 3 years this year, and she says it all the time. Her daughter was 6 months old when her mum passed away, and now she's got a second daughter, and she's like, I just don't know who to go to with all these questions about
Yeah,
motherhood and what
yeah,
that looks like. I don't know
yeah,
who to go and speak to about it.
yeah.
And it is so difficult. And I commend you for being so kind of open and honest, because it's easy to sit there and go, it was hard, but I got through it. I was all right. And I think, no, it's okay to turn around and say, it was fucking hard and I struggled and
Oh,
I still struggle with it.
like that's what I said before we started. I'll always say it. It never gets better; it just gets easier.
Yeah.
Because you saw me now. You seen it yourself tear up, and when I
Yeah.
speak about him, it's not that hard to tear up. And I speak about my
No.
nan, it's not that hard to tear up. It's not. It's not hard.
Yeah.
It's not hard to feel emotional about them because and like you said, in the workplace, and I think that needs to be looked at. Absolutely, I completely agree, and I would definitely support you on your message on that. Is because in the workplace, and I'll tell you from this perspective, in with workplaces, a lot of them got this statement, well-being,
Yeah.
things like that. They got this statement, the blue sky statement, and that's what I meant by if it takes a village to raise one, it takes a village to neglect one, and that's no different in the workplace and the community. And if you look at it from this perspective, and that's the point, I think this needs to be looked at as a whole across the country. Is that in the job that you're in now, if you pass away, your job title will be put out to advert
Yeah.
within a week. When you pass away, and then within a week, your job title gets put out online again to fill your post. If they're doing that, I'm sure they're not supporting people who's got grief.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Exactly. Because I think as well, that's such an important point. Because imagine you're a family member that sees that a few days or a week after your loved one's just passed. It almost makes, I can imagine if I'd seen that. I mean, my dad worked for himself, but if I had seen that a week or so, it would have made me go, so it so to you he's just gone. To me, like, and I remember saying in one of the early podcasts, I burst into tears in the middle of Tesco a week after my dad died, because I was just like, I can't comprehend, this pain feels so much that
Yeah,
I can't comprehend that the rest of the world is still spinning and everyone else can just be in here picking up a loaf of bread, and it not be sort of impacting everybody. And I think when you see things like that, you see that person's job come back up or those sort of things, it makes you go, oh, they're insignificant to other people when they mean so much to me.
how you look, that person is important to that particular
Mm,
set of people, where that looks like. And like you said, absolutely, grief needs to be looked at more in the workplace, because like I said, if the employers can put your job title out after a week or
mm,
two after you've passed on, then clearly their support for people with grief, I don't think that'll be there. And you are
mm,
right, it's not that much, 2 or 3 days. It's the same with men with paternity leave. It's only 2 weeks. I
yeah.
know you can share it with your I know you can share it with your your wife or your girlfriend now, or whatnot. But same thing. Like paternity leave is only 2 weeks, and but grieving 2 3 days. Do you know what I mean?
I know.
It's,
And some people, their fault, me and Laura were talking about it, like I ended up getting signed off, and I was off for about, I can't remember exactly now, but I think it was about a month that I was off. But obviously there was a lot of shock there because my dad died the way that he did.
yeah.
There was just a lot of shock element to it, and there was no way I could have come back. But there came a point where I sort of had to, because although my work, the company I was working for at the time, they were relatively supportive. They were still giving me my majority of my wage, but that role was quite heavily commission based. So every day I was in a financial position that I could say, well, even if they don't end up paying me and I get no sick leave, I've got some savings. I'm just not ready to go back to work. I'll take what it is. But there came a point where you sort of have to go, even if I don't quite feel ready financially, I've got to go back. I can't keep staying off work. And I think for a lot of people, if you are on a 0 hours contract or you are on minimum wage and your loved one, like your dad, your mum, your brother, your sister, your best friend, whoever it is,
Yeah,
passes away,
yeah.
you are expected to say, okay, well, TikTok, when are you going to stop crying about it? We need you back.
It-
And
do
that's how it feels.
you know what? And you couldn't have put that better, and that's why I said, "Hang on a minute." Like when I lost dad, I was 34. Sorry, 32. Sorry, 32, and you expect me to get over 32 years
Biggest.
of my life in 2 days.
Yeah,
And I don't think people. I think employers need to look at that. I
I
think that
agree.
they need to look into that, and I don't know how you would look at that, but for me, I would look into that as well-being. The well-being of a person, really, in terms of
Mm.
that, and because it really does affect. But yet again, the way the things are today, it's tough because like you said, people on 0 hours contract or on minimum wage, and some of these people have got young families as well to feed. So if they don't go back to work early enough, then they're not going to get money to continue with their lives. So it's a tough one. And that's why I think employers do need to be a lot more supportive there.
Yeah,
Well-being wise, and I think financially as well. They
yeah.
needs to be a lot more supportive. I agree with you there, 100%.
Oh, Wes, it has been such a pleasure to speak to you. I've really enjoyed having you on because I think it's just so good to hear your story is, one that I think many people need to hear anyway and will have an impact on so many people's lives. And I'm sure when you've spoke to other people, it has done already. I just think hearing it from a side of the impact that I love hearing about other people's families and the impact that they have on them and your loved ones and stuff like that. I think it's so important to give people a platform to still feel like they're here because often once they've passed, people stop asking you about them and you don't get to talk about them as regularly as you'd maybe like to or as regularly as you think about them. And the emotion that you've shown today, I really appreciate that because it takes a lot to be vulnerable. And I think to all the kids that you work with, to see someone like yourself that is happy to come on a podcast like this and shed a tear talking about the people that you love, that's
Yeah.
what we need, more people like you, working with children. So
And
no, I
people
love
know me
that.
as well. People know me about how I feel about my dad, and losing him. And but like you are right, like losing the memory. And I talk about my especially my great granddad as well. I'll speak about him to as many people as I can, And
Yeah.
before we finish, like to put it out there, he served in World War II. If it wasn't for hundreds of thousands of brave men and women like him, I
Yeah.
might not be sat here now called Wesley Cunliffe. Actually, my full name, Wesley Thomas Owen Cunliffe. Do you mean the grandson of Owen Cunliffe, the great grandson of Thomas Cunliffe? Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
just that alone says the bravery of men like him, and that will never be forgotten. Never be forgotten.
No.
I still got his uniform here, hung up. I got on the wall, in a nice box, and things like that, and still got that. Like that's not going anywhere. That's proud history, and like you said, that people like men and women like him cannot be forgotten.
No.
For what they sacrificed for me, And he says, and it always sticks with me. He says, "No man comes home from war." That's what he says. He says, "No man comes home from war." So I get what he says by that now. He was a different man coming back than what he was going in.
Mm.
And I got to thank him for that. And I think just for that sacrifice alone, his name and his memory should never be forgotten. Really, same as the
Mm.
other 100,000 other men and women. So yeah, but no, thank you for having me on. It's been amazing to speak about this, and I think that your podcast will be on a great journey. I think because this is something that's not is not looked at where it should be looked at. Grief can be a consuming thing. It
Yeah.
can it can
And
consume you.
And I think you've spoke about it in so many different lights as well. You've lost people, but you've had a journey with yourself, your own sort of self-discovery, leaving a version of you behind and having to step forward, your relationship with your daughter and your kids. Like that's a version of grief in itself. And when you've got to make those difficult choices in life and you've not got people by your side to help you do some of it, you know, we all go through it, but for whatever reason, and what we're trying to stop is it being such a taboo subject. You know, life's fucking hard. And that, you know, it's so hard. And I think if we like, I think we need to try and start building that community, like we said, and start being there for each other. And had I have not started this podcast with Laura, then I would never have met yourself, never would have come across you or your story. And you've definitely made an impact on me today, and I'm sure our
I
listeners
appreciate
will
that.
feel the same. So
I appreciate
thank
that. No,
you.
I did. Thank you very much. No, thank you for having me. Like I said again, your podcast will be on a special journey. The topic that you're talking about, for me, is not a taboo subject. Yeah. At the end of the day, people's lost loved ones. You know, like I said, somebody's mother, somebody's sister, somebody's daughter, somebody's cousin,
Mm,
somebody's best friend. You know, somebody's dad, uncle, brother. Well, how you look at it, that somebody was important to someone.
mm,
And when you lose that person, especially in a shock decision, in a shock way, like you didn't
mm.
expect it coming, it's going to knock you for six. So I will say to people, reach out to other people, speak to other people. I wish I did. I didn't at first until I spoke to the Reverend,
Mm,
and that was years. That was years.
yeah.
So
No,
speak to
thank
people.
you.
Please speak to people. That needs to be done. Speak to people. Don't keep it within yourself.
Yeah.
It's
Problem shared is a problem halved,
it's
I
a
always
poisonous
say.
thing. It's a poisonous thing, and it'll consume you. So grief can really consume you. So I will really. That's my last bit of advice. Really, speak out to anybody about it that you can, that you trust. Speak out.
Mm. Thank you. Thanks, Wes. And thanks everyone for listening. I appreciate you know, slightly different episode having a guest on, but I think it adds so much value to our listeners and people that are kind of following us on a bit of a journey. And I hope that this maybe reaches some people from your network as well, Wes, that maybe following you for different reasons, but you know, now this is an opportunity for them to hear maybe a slightly different side to your story that they've heard before, and go from there. But thanks everyone for listening. Give us a follow, give us a like. Make sure you follow Wes as well on social media. What's your at, Wes?
It's Wesley Cunliffe on Instagram and Wesley Owen Cunliffe for Facebook.
Perfect. But yeah, thank you all very much. See you soon.